Well, Democrats should be very worried about the upcoming 2026 Senate races. Recently, incumbent Michigan Senator Gary Peters has announced that he's not going to be running for re-election in Michigan. And, this is the first of the incumbent senators to announce that they will not be seeking re-election. And this is going to set up a huge, huge showdown in Michigan in 2026. But before we get into this, if you're new to the channel, go on down, hit that subscribe button, get notified whenever we get more information up. And if you liked our content that we're putting out, hit that like button. We really appreciate it here. Now, Peters, who was initially elected in 2014, obviously that was a midterm year during Barack Obama's second term, was elected by about 54% of the voting population, about $1.7 million, was then reelected in 2020, barely elected. I guess I shouldn't say completely barely, but he was below 50%, was able to outrun his Republican opponent, John James, who was a congressman, by about 90,000 votes at that time, but did significantly run behind Joe Biden in that race. Now we can take a look at in 2020, for the actual presidential election, when Joe Biden won with 306 electoral votes. He did carry the state of Michigan by about 4 points. Biden was able to carry about 2.8 million voters in the state of Michigan, while Gary Peters was only able to pick up about 2.73. So ran about 70,000 votes behind Biden in 2020. And honestly, I'm really not that surprised that Gary Peters is not running for election. He embarrassed himself a couple days ago during the Pete Hegseth hearings pretty badly. Let's take a look at it. I'll just say that not surprised he's not running for re-election after this one.
I don't know of any corporate board of directors that would hire a CEO for a major company if they came and said, I supervised 100 people before. They'd ask you, well, what kind of experiences you had? We need innovation. Can you give me an experience or your actual experience of driving innovation in an organization? Give me an example of where you have done that.
Oh my goodness, Senator, absolutely. At Concerned Veterans for America, we created the Fixing Veterans Healthcare Task Force, a bipartisan task force that had never been done before, to create policy, to drive policy change on Capitol Hill that organizations fought ferociously against. We got the VA Accountability Act passed and the Mission Act passed in a way that a nonprofit of our size, veterans organization, has never done. And that's testified in all the letters that we put forward to the committee, which are on the record.
I have limited.
Yep. Thank you for just owning me on national television right now. But just like most Democrats during these committee hearings and Senate hearings on President Trump's nominations to lead different departments in the federal government, most of them have just had big swings and big misses. I really can't think of, as of right now, one that really connected. You had Bernie Sanders going after RFK Jr. about onesies. Are you going to denounce the onesies? Denounce the onesies. It's just like, what a joke. And Elizabeth Warren trying to see if RFK will not sue pharmaceutical companies. Like, what kind of joke is this? What kind of joke is this? But obviously, they're going to try and play the game. Obviously, they're going to play the gotcha game, but it seems like they seem to be the only ones who have really gotten played so far in this. But in Michigan, it is going to be a serious battle. And as of right now, the biggest names that have been floated, or people that have shown any interest in running for this seat, really the big one is going to be former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg of the great and wonderful state of Indiana, who is really most notably known for becoming the transportation secretary because he's gay. Like, let's be honest, the Biden administration, it was, if you were a minority, you could be in the administration. If you were gay, you could be in the administration. If you were a black female, you could be in the administration. If you had a disability, you could be in the administration. Well, most people who are Democrats, I could say, have some sort of disability, but and also, I'd say his biggest accomplishment that he can run on was implementing the DEI hires at the FAA. Recently there was a plane crash that I believe about 67 or 70 people had died in. But now it's coming out that the FAA embroiled in these lawsuits now that allege that they turned away over 1,000 applicants based on race. The Federal Aviation Administration is fighting a class action lawsuit alleging that it denied 1,000 would-be air traffic controllers because of diversity hiring targets, as it was revealed that staffing levels were, quote, not normal at the time of this week's deadly mid-air collision, where 67, I was correct, 67 people in the country's deadliest aviation disaster in almost a quarter century. We really haven't had a big disaster like this since 2009, but it just shows, the FAA is under the control of the Department of Transportation, and that was under the control of Pete Buttigieg, where they implemented these very, very radical gender and race quotas that they needed to meet. They don't look at merit. How good of an air traffic controller are you? Nope. Are you black? Are you gay? And it makes sense because that's the same way that he was able to get his job. But also, so he's the biggest one on the Democrat side that has come out. Most notably, people who have kind of stepped out of it is Governor Gretchen Whitmer. She stated that she's not going to be running for the seat, and most likely it's because she's got 2028 ambitions. But you can see down here, she is governor of Michigan, who she will be term limited here coming up soon. And she most likely has 2028 ambitions to go after the Democrat, the presidential election. I could see why she doesn't want to do this. Too many commitments in Washington may bog her down. But we'll have to check back on how everything's going on the Democrat side. But as of right now, Pete Buttigieg is basically the figure at the top of the hill that the Democrats have right now. Now on the Republican side, really there's two of the biggest names that we've seen is Tudor Dixon and Mike Rogers have both publicly expressed interest in running to be the next senator from Michigan to replace Gary Peters. Now, Dixon, she's a conservative media personality. She also ran in 2022 against Gretchen Whitmer when she was running for re-election, lost that statewide election. And then also Mike Rogers, who he also just finished a statewide race against Elise, I don't know how to say her last name, but Slotkin, I believe, is how you say her last name, where Mike Rogers narrowly lost by about 19,000 votes. In which he lost to the current senator, who she was a representative at the time, but now the current senator from Michigan. But no formal announcements have occurred for any of these, on the Democrat or Republican side as of right now. And so we'll keep you updated on this as things develop in the Michigan race. But this is going to be a hotly contested race. Very, very hotly contested. This was a state that voted for Donald Trump in 2016, jumped back to Joe Biden in 2020, and back to Trump in 2024. Obviously, this is a swing state, and looking at the 2026 map here, I know we covered it in our other video on kind of an early look at the 2026 map, but it is very safe to say that Democrats have a very tough map to even just defend the seats that they currently hold, let alone go on the offense and try and pick up seats. As I've said in my other video, they're going to have to spend a lot of money defending lean Democrat seats like Colorado, where you have John Hickenlooper, who's running for re-election, where they could put up a good fight there, especially with the immigration problems that they're having in Colorado. The gangs that have taken over different apartment buildings in Aurora, Colorado, and the crime that is really out of control in Colorado. And the same thing in Minnesota, where you have Senator Tina Smith, who's up for re-election. She was initially appointed, this is back during Trump's first administration, to replace Al Franken when he resigned after his, whole little scandal, which was kind of a joke, but he resigned and we got the wonderful Tina Smith. What a joke. To be the senator from Minnesota. And then you have New Hampshire and Georgia, and then, of course, Michigan. Now, obviously, the two ones that are sticking out that are going to be the hardest for the Democrats to defend are going to be Georgia and Michigan. Michigan, obviously carried by President Trump. Mike Rogers came within 19,000 votes of winning that Senate seat in 2024. And then Georgia, where Trump won it pretty handedly. I think he won it by, I believe He had it by 3 or 4 percentage points. Let's see if we can find this. So let's see. He flipped it back. Okay, actually only about 2.5 points he won the state by a little, about 115,000 votes he was able to carry the state by. But you have Senator John Ossoff, who's up for re-election, who, he lost, or excuse me, he was elected in 2021 in the runoff election. And how the rules are in Georgia is a candidate has to get 50% in order for them to become the senator. So initially, he had lost the popular vote to David Perdue, but then in the runoff, he was able to pull ahead and win by, I believe, less than a percentage point. But Georgia is it's a red state. Now, it's more lean than it is safe red, but it's a red state, and especially if you have a candidate like Brian Kemp, who's a very, very, very popular governor from Georgia, who's going to be running potentially, hasn't announced yet, but potentially in that Senate seat. That's going to be a really tough one for the Democrats to defend in the 2026 race. So you look where they're going on defense. Colorado, Georgia, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire. That's going to cost a lot of money to defend those seats, especially Georgia and Michigan. And really, where can they go on offensive? Typically you might say something like Ohio or Iowa, maybe Kansas. Nah, not Kansas, but Iowa, Ohio. If I was the Democrats, I wouldn't even try and go after Iowa. That's a Republican seat. That is a Republican seat. Joni Ernst, if she wins her primary, there's been some talk that she may get primaried by somebody on the right. We'll see what happens. But I think that's a safe Republican seat. And along with the Ohio seat that replaced, that was filled when J.D. Vance became vice president, he's up for re-election again. So I just don't. Ohio is a safe Trump state. I'm sure we can look and see in 2024, let's see, he won Ohio by, oh my goodness, by what, 13 percentage points. Winning the state by almost 700,000 votes. That's going to be a tough place. I don't think Democrats are going to be competitive there, just to be honest. Now, where can they go on offensive? I think the two places they can look at is North Carolina and Maine. Now, Maine, you have Susan Collins. She's been there since 1997. She's a much more moderate Republican. She was in 2020 when she was up for re-election. She won the state by about 8 points at the same time when Biden won the state by about 7 or 8 points. And then in North Carolina, where you have Tom Tillis, who's up for re-election. I think North Carolina is trending more to the right. I think it was trending much more to the left the last decade. But I think we're going to see a trend back to the right in North Carolina. But as of right now, and although it's only January 31st of 2025, so we're almost 2 years out from the midterm elections, but Democrats should really mentally prepare themselves for the fact that President Trump will most likely retain the Senate through his entire second term, and it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and money to even just retain the 47 seats that they have right now. We could easily see it that Michigan and Georgia go to the Republicans, and the Republicans have a 10-seat majority in the Senate, having 55 senators. I think it's a little more of a long shot. Minnesota, Colorado, New Hampshire. I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in Minnesota. Governor Tim Walz will be up for re-election, and after his failed, extremely miserable failure in the presidential election, he was probably the worst VP candidate you could have picked. Kamala had much better candidates, but of course, Kamala is pretty low on the threshold, and you got to pick someone who's dumber than you, lower than you on it. But I think with Tim Walz's national ambitions and just his ambitions in 2024, I think are definitely going to hurt him in Minnesota and Republicans down ballot alike, or excuse me, Democrats down ballot alike. So we could easily see this as a 10-seat majority for the Republicans. And that's probably not a bad day for Democrats, where they could easily, depending on how the next 2 years plays out, lose New Hampshire or lose Minnesota. I think Minnesota is the after Michigan and Georgia. I think Minnesota is where it's going to be at. You look in 2020, Kamala only won the state by about 4 percentage points. in 2024. So we'll see how this all plays out. We're going to be here to keep you up to date on whatever happens. But here's the current breakdown of the Senate right now. And really, the only chance that the Democrats have to retain these seats where they're at right now, like I said, I have a hard time. I think Democrat ceiling is 47 seats. Just my personal opinion. I think their ceiling is 47 seats. Just a personal opinion. I don't see them picking up Maine. I don't see them picking up North Carolina. And I think it's going to be a tough battle to retain the seats that they currently have right now. But the only chance that they really have to go on the offensive is it's a stretch, it's a lofty goal, but they need to break away from the leash that the far left progressive Democrats like AOC have put on the majority of the base. The 20% of the far left Democrats have put their leash on the 80% of the Democrat, the traditional Democrat base, and really break away from the terrible policies that they've promoted over the last decade, whether it's their open border immigration policies, soft on crime policies, their radical gender ideology, policies that they're trying to promote through the school systems, and really simply just blaming everything on racism and sexism. That's really not, I feel like Kamala did a pretty good job staying away from the racism and sexism claims in 2024 and staying away from the, I'm the first woman. She did a good job staying away from that. But let's just take a look. I have a hard time seeing that the Democrats are going to be able to break away from that. Simply, if you just look at the DNC forum recently, where they are electing the new DNC chair, let's just take a look at how unintelligent these people are.
This round, so I'm going to, I have a show of hands. How many of you believe that racism and misogyny played a role in Vice President Harris's defeat? Okay. So that's good. You all passed.
Oh, that's good. You all passed. What a joke. Fine. Keep running down that rabbit hole. You're going to lose again in 26. You're going to lose in 28 if you keep going down that road. It's kind of ridiculous that every person, nobody on the DNC stage has got any kahunas. They got nothing. Nada. It's like, what a joke. What a joke. The fact that they got absolutely demolished and we're going to blame it on racism and sexism. Donald Trump's victory in 2024 was the most diverse Republican victory that they have ever seen. Ever seen. They had highs with Asian Americans. They had highs with African Americans. They had highs with women, college educated, non-college educated. The Republican Party is the most diverse it has been in probably a century. Maybe more than a century, without looking at the specifics. This is the most diverse Republican Party that you have ever seen in my lifetime, and probably most people who's alive's lifetime. So unless there are major shifts that occur in the next 2 years, or frankly 4 years for 2028, I would expect the GOP to dominate the 2026 Senate map and hold control of the Senate for the very foreseeable future from now.